I'm going to take this opportunity to geek out a little bit on biomimicry before I tell you about my project, because I'm very passionate about it, and I was lucky enough to manage to delve deeper into biomimicry through this final project. So let's see if I can move on. There we go. In a few words, biomimicry is the imitation of nature, the imitation of the structures, the processes, and the systems we find in nature. And it's based on the fact that nature, throughout its 3.8 billion years of evolution, has figured out what works and what doesn't on a planet that has constrained resources. And so in this way, biomimicry is a tool not only for radical innovation, but for radical innovation in a sustainable and even in a regenerative way. I could go forever on examples, but I'm just going to talk about three. So thanks to biomimicry, researchers have managed to design surfaces that are naturally antimicrobial and antiviral. And that is because they're imitating the shark's nanostructure of the skin. In terms of energy and renewable energy, by imitating the way those ridges that you see in the blue whale's fin, by imitating this, they've managed to design the turbines for the wind engines in such a way that they have less drag and they can produce more energy as compared to traditional blades. And then ants, and how ants communicate and how ants transport food is inspiring ways to redesign our food transport system to minimize waste and increase energy efficiency as well. But with biomimicry, it's not all very easy, and there are barriers, and that's basically for three main reasons. First is because biomimicry requires a huge level of abstraction to go from biology to design. Second is because it requires huge amounts of expertise in both the biology field and the field of implementation, which can be architecture, engineering, or just general design. And third, because it requires a type of collaboration and communication that's very interdisciplinary and for which we don't usually train in formal education. But overall, one of the main barriers is transitioning this type of technology that's very based on research into industry. And so this is where my client comes in. So my client is the Biomimicry Institute. They are a nonprofit organization founded in 2007 in the United States. And they work to empower people to design a better world inspired by nature. And they do so through several programs, one of which is called Ask Nature, and is the one that I'm going to talk about today. And so Ask Nature is an online website that works as a library of biological resources and allows people who don't know about biology to understand how biology works, and so then they can apply it to the fields of practice. And so when I reached out to the Biomimicry Institute with the idea of this final project, they came back to me with two main pain points. First is, how do we become more financially sustainable? And second, are there any revenue opportunities within Ask Nature that we can benefit from, specifically within the corporate audience? And these two problems are very different, right? So financial sustainability for a nonprofit is one issue, and then making Ask Nature successful in terms of revenue generation is dealing with technology implementation, and that's a whole different story. So what I did was I started off by attempting to do a market analysis to understand what is out there, what do clients need? And so I did more than 30 interviews with all stakeholders of the Biomimicry Institute. And these are including education, they're also including the biomimicry community, and more specifically, the corporate audience. And so I spoke to product designers and engineers and sustainability officers of companies like Gap or Procter & Gamble, Lockheed Martin. And then I conducted a focus group along with a design firm and a social innovation firm that basically designs innovation programs for companies. And they helped me figure out what the value proposition for Ask Nature and the strengths and weaknesses of the Biomimicry Institute are. And then with all this information, plus a study of what the competitive landscape looks like, I put together a competitive landscape analysis, followed by a SWOT analysis to figure out how does the Biomimicry Institute and how does Ask Nature fit into the current landscape, the current innovation landscape. My main research findings were four. First of all, I discovered that there's a big misalignment within the Biomimicry Institute in terms of what the value proposition, and the long-term goals of Ask Nature are. And until there isn't an alignment within the people in the organization, there's very little that I can do with my other findings and recommendations. Second, I found that there's a big distinction between R&D and non-R&D companies in terms of how they relate to Ask Nature and biomimicry. So R&D companies have the capacity to do biomimicry. They can do that research. And so they want something specific from Ask Nature, and non-R&D companies do not have the capacity to abstract and create new designs, and they want more of a plug and play type of solution. Third thing that I found is that there's actually no willingness to pay within the corporate audience, which is obviously not what my client wanted to hear, but it's what my findings are pointing towards. And lastly, that no matter who I spoke to, the strengths of Ask Nature rely mostly on education. And so with all this information, I built one database, 8 different business models for the different revenue streams that I identified, along with feasibility analysis for each, and then a multi-case, multi-year financial model to explore how one of these business models would look like in 3 years in terms of revenue. And finally, I am recommending 3 things for them. First is that they diversify their funders, not necessarily their revenue streams. And this is based on nonprofit research that has found that nonprofits that become successful and grow do so by excelling at targeting one type of funding stream. My second recommendation is that they develop Ask Nature specifically for education, and that they target higher education as a bridge to industry. And the last is that they embrace the biomimicry community that's out there, and they build the capacity for the community to co-create the tool and take it to the next level. And in 2 seconds, I would like to end with these 2 images. And so as green as our technology is, I think until we can manage to go from the image on the left to the image on the right in terms of how our technology ends its life cycle, we have a lot to learn. The good thing is nature is everywhere, and all we have to do is look. Thank you.
Right. Excellent, and an inspirational ending. I don't know how to pick up on that. I'm sure we'll have some great questions. How did they respond? It's always an interesting thing when you deliver the news that a client doesn't necessarily expect or want to hear.
Well, the meeting is next week, but I've been working with them very closely, and so they already kind of know what I'm getting at. Even though I'm saying don't target corporates right now, I am trying to identify, and I have identified ways that they can get to them. They're just not the ways that they were expecting to obtain revenue. And so my goal is to still give them the tools to continue. And this research has obviously its limitations and is going to require further research, but to empower them to get to where they want to be.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do I understand you to say that there is an interest in biomimicry and corporate R&D, but they don't want to pay Biomimicry Institute for it, or they don't see them as the
Ask Nature doesn't have the capacity to deliver the depth and breadth of knowledge that R&D companies need, because that's the biggest gap right now. Is biomimicry is a great conceptual idea and the potential is enormous, but the research required to make biomimicry successful is so high that not everyone can do it. And that's why for now it remains mostly in academia.
Mm-hmm. All right. Bunch of questions coming in. What about, let's see, what surprised you? What was your biggest surprise? What did you find you just didn't expect to find, other than probably anything?
Well, I think I expected a different response from the corporate audience,
mm-hmm.
and I think they would be more proactive to finding solutions. And at the same time, I shouldn't have been surprised, but if it doesn't affect their bottom line, or it doesn't link directly to the company's bottom line, they're not really interested. And so I think I came in with rose-tinted glasses and then realized, okay, this is great. And everyone in the biomimicry community is like very hippie excited about this, but the truth is it's not there yet, not a mature technology.
What about a partnership strategy? Another question here is other NGOs or other kind of education field or science field. Is that a possible way of expanding their capacity? And
yes, and it's one of my, obviously I couldn't put everything here, but one of my recommendations is to find the right partners. And I believe if they find a firm that's technologically capable, they can really launch biomimicry out into the world. But I think the innovation path forward for biomimicry is similar to design thinking and IDEO, and they need a cheerleader that can really make a case for biomimicry the way IDEO made it for design thinking. And then once it's evident that biomimicry is a powerful tool, then it can move forward. So that can definitely and should definitely happen through partnerships.
Uh-huh. Well, it kind of related question to that. I mean, did you find similar organizations that are doing the things that you're recommending that Biomimicry Institute does?
No, and that's there's nobody doing exactly the same, but so there's nothing like Ask Nature exists out there. But there are small initiatives that are starting to replicate what Ask Nature does, because it's not doing it for everyone. That's why, and they're coming from the biomimicry community worldwide. Mm-hmm. So instead of trying to develop everything themselves, that's why one of my recommendations is look at the community, because there's a lot of energy there, and you have the brand recognition to bring it all together and somehow create this open innovation platform for it.
And is this a community that they're aware of already, or that you kind of helped discover?
Yes and no. I think as many nonprofits, they're on a tight budget, and they don't have a lot of time to spend on things that are not going to affect their capacity to ask for more grants or more donations. And so doing this type of research is not something that they can afford.
Hence student power, yes.
And student power, yeah.
All right, we're getting close to the end too, but this is a very interesting question. So your one of your recommendations was kind of moving up the levels in education. Our always out of the box thinker Karina is saying, well, what about moving the other way? A lot of interest in getting kids more outdoors, even before COVID, but certainly with COVID now. Are there opportunities to bring biomimicry down to the, I don't know, early grades, kindergarten?
Yeah, and in fact, that's one of the focus areas of the Biomimicry Institute currently. So what they do have is lower education resources for biomimicry. And they have a ton of workshops and programs and things for kindergarten teachers and for kids. And as a nonprofit that is working to democratize biomimicry, they're already offering that for free, which is great. And so that's kind of a no out of bounds territory to monetize off of. It would be very like problematic if they did. That's why looking into higher education, which is more tied to industry and the links are easier to establish, is better for revenue generating purposes.
I don't know. I mean, I think if you did the math, you'd find more invested in lower education. Anyway, let's see about that. Perhaps another opportunity. All right, but anyway, thanks again, Pablo. We've got